Hello, boys and girls and babes. Welcome back to the Janaea Talks Caps podcast. As always, thank you so much for tuning in today. And today we're going to do a little bit of a post-trade deadline podcast episode here. Just kind of giving the initial thoughts after the trade deadline has passed. Obviously, we'll have to wait, a few weeks or a few months to see how everything truly plays out. But as far as the Caps were concerned, of course, making a couple of big moves prior to the trade deadline. They were kind of quiet on trade deadline day itself on the Monday, February 24th. Just making one smaller move for those who missed it, sending AHL defenseman Christian Juice to the Anaheim Ducks organization in exchange for forward Daniel Sprong. This, in my opinion, has the potential to be a very underrated move for the Caps. Christian Juice, of course, he's an excellent defenseman. He's a small guy, but he's an NHL caliber defenseman. He deserves to be playing in the NHL. He was simply never going to crack the lineup here in Washington, as the Caps obviously have so much depth at the position, at all positions really. So for Juice, I think Brian McClellan has done right by him by sending him to an organization where, he does have the chance to be an NHL regular. And that's all that you can really ask for as a player, is to have the chance, right? So he sends him to the Anaheim Ducks organization. Juice, I flicked on the game the other night. Anaheim was playing and Juice was not only in the lineup, but he was on the ice in overtime for the Ducks in their win over the Edmonton Oilers. So that's great for him. He wasn't getting any, like I said, he wasn't even able to crack the lineup in Washington here this year. A lot of that, of course, due to the fact that I said it when it happened. I think probably the worst thing that happened to him was that he actually won his arbitration case over the summer there, and he was awarded a contract that was, a cap hit, especially, that was maybe a little bit too high. Certainly more than what the Caps were anticipating, and because of that, they really weren't able to afford to have him in their NHL lineup. That combined with the fact that the Caps do have such depth at the position, and it just, it really didn't make sense to have him in Washington with the big club. So for Juice, I think going over to Anaheim, that's great for him. That's something that, like I said, we weren't going to see it here. He wasn't able to get into our lineup this year at all, and then obviously, he would never be on the ice in overtime for the Caps. You would just simply never see that. So great for him. I was really happy for him when I flicked on the TV and I heard his name being called and he's out there on the ice in overtime. So really happy for him, and I hope that he does get his chance with Anaheim, like I said, to be an NHL regular, because I think he is that caliber of defenseman. He is that caliber player. He can play, he can play regular minutes in the NHL. I think that he's that good. And even if it wasn't going to happen with Washington because the Caps are just simply too deep, I do hope that it happens for him with Anaheim. But on the Caps side of things, like I said, I think it has the potential to be a very underrated move, as Daniel Sprong, the player that's coming back. Maybe some of you might remember, he was in the Pittsburgh Penguins organization at one time. He's still just 22 years old, so he's a very young player. Certainly has a lot of untapped potential that the Caps obviously are thinking and hoping that they can bring out in him. But when he was with the Pittsburgh Penguins organization, he's so talented that they actually saw fit to play him on Crosby's line for a while there. He was playing on Sidney Crosby's line. He had 14 goals just a couple of seasons ago. And he's kind of a player that, although maybe little known, because like I said, he is still fairly young, but he's somebody who, with the right coaching staff, if he can reach his potential, it's going to be a steal for the Caps. And like I said, he has scored 14 goals before in a season in the NHL. And that, like I said, it was just a couple of seasons ago, just last season actually. And he did that in only 47 games. So he had 14 goals and 19 points in just 47 games with Anaheim. So I think, he's showed that he definitely does have a lot of potential. And like I said, still just 22 years old. So I think coming into the Caps organization, the Anaheim Ducks organization, nothing against them at all. But the Washington Capitals organization, certainly Todd Reardon in particular, the entire coaching staff, the entire organization, really, they've shown just such a talent for bringing up young players, developing them properly, and really, putting them in positions to succeed, kind of teaching them one thing at a time, year over year. We saw it a lot with Tom Wilson, just kind of adding one thing after another to his game, giving him one thing to work on at a time. First when he came up, obviously he was a fourth line player, under, Adam Oates, using him on the fourth line, just kind of as a goon. But then, Barry Trotz and Todd Reardon and these guys came in, and Todd Reardon worked with him a lot. Of course, Todd Reardon was the defensive coach at that time, but he really had a lot of one-on-one contact with a guy like Tom Wilson, and just kind of, the coaching staff would just give him like one thing at a time, like I said, to work on, kind of coming into each season. We want you to improve on this over the off season. Next year we want you to improve on this over the off season. So at first, it was kind of his defensive game. Then they added penalty killing to his repertoire. Of course, now he's one of the Caps' best penalty killers, on a penalty kill that is top 5 in the entire NHL. He's a huge part of that. So, and then after the penalty kill, then they wanted him to work on his offensive game. And of course, now he's a 20-plus goal scorer, an offensive force playing on the top line. So the Caps organization as a whole, especially in recent years, they've really shown such a talent for just properly developing these young players. So I think for Daniel Sprong, perfect situation for him coming in. Like I said, he's just 22 years old, and he does have a ton of talent. Like I said, he was playing on Pittsburgh's top line for a point in time. They saw fit that he had enough talent to be there playing with Sidney Crosby. So I think that if the Caps, do the same thing, develop him properly, he can really be a steal for the Caps in this deal. And then, of course, the two larger trades that happened, like I said, just before the trade deadline, didn't happen on deadline day, but Ilya Kovalchuk, he's a Washington Capital. And I really love this. Like, there's certainly mixed reviews coming in from Caps fans. And I think a lot of people are kind of being a little bit unfair towards Kovalchuk in a sense. Kind of a lot of, predetermined opinions, preconceived notions about what type of a guy he might be, because of course, the situation that happened with the New Jersey Devils. But the thing is, none of us really know what went down with New Jersey. We've heard one side of the story only, and that's New Jersey's side of the story. So there's always two sides to every coin, right? And as far as, for me, I care about more recent events. I don't care what happened with New Jersey 6-7 years ago, whatever. I care about recent events, how he was this year with Montreal. That's the most recent comparison that we can draw, as that's the most recent NHL team that he's played for. So when you talk to people around the Montreal Canadiens organization, they just have glowing things top to bottom to say about him. All you really have to do as a fan, right, is go read the comments from all of the Habs fans who are just completely pissed off at their general manager, because, just to quote some of them here, I'm just pulling up the comments just now. Here's one comment from one Habs fan. Covey had brought the spark that we needed. Another comment from another fan. He was the only guy giving 110% every day for this team. He was their best player for Montreal. He was playing on their top line. He was, if you watch their games, he was giving 110% every single day. He was at almost a point per game during his short tenure there with the Habs, and just scoring huge goals for them. He kind of single-handedly pulled them back into the fight and got them back into the playoff push there. So, and just an exciting player. He was so excited to be there. That's what I really loved seeing. He just wanted to help them. He just came in. He just wanted to help them. He wanted to help them get to the playoffs. And Habs fans just really pissed off that their general manager decided to trade Kovalchuk. So for me, that's all you really need to know, is to go read that's always what I do whenever we make a trade. I go read the comments on the threads from fans of the other team who we just got the guy from, because for me, that really tells you all that you need to know, because these fans have watched that player every game, right? So for me, Caps fans concerned, like I said, maybe having some preconceived notions about who Kovalchuk is as a guy off the ice. what I say to those fans are, Brian McClellan, he's not an idiot. Like, you don't think that he got probably like 200 referrals from everyone Kovalchuk has ever come into contact with before pulling the trigger on this. And like I said, everything coming out of Montreal, all of the reports from not only all of the media, but from all of his teammates, from the coaching staff, from the general manager, from fans, from everybody, just top to bottom, absolutely glowing reports about Kovalchuk. They haven't been able to say enough about, just what a great guy he is on the ice and off the ice. Just glowing remarks about, his attitude, I guess you could say, off the ice and in the locker room. They were all just basically saying, what a great teammate he is, how easily and how well he fit in, and just basically how he was so happy to come to the rink every day. He's always going to give 110%, these types of things, So I think that, Caps fans who are maybe kind of drawing a conclusion too quickly, I would urge you to give it some time, and possibly just, wait and see how it plays out, because I do think that a lot of you are going to be proven wrong, because the reports coming out of Montreal, from people who are really close to him, like I said, from his teammates and whatnot, from his coaches, just 110% glowing remarks. They can't say enough good things about what a good guy he is, not only on the ice, but off the ice as well, and in the locker room. And on the ice, for the Caps, what this trade does is it instantly makes our third line so much better. Kovalchuk, obviously, he's still a pretty big offensive threat, even at 36 years old. And for McClellan, this was kind of one of those quintessential low-risk, high-reward moves that McClellan just loves to make, and that I love too. I love them a lot, because, you don't really give up much. Like, we gave up peanuts, basically, in return to get Kovalchuk, trading a third-round draft pick. And the reports were as well that, the general manager from Montreal, Mark Bergevin, he had a better offer apparently, actually from the Boston Bruins. There were supposedly multiple teams, was the report, that had interest in Kovalchuk, and there were multiple offers coming in, but talking specifically about, the top tier teams, like the top tier of teams that you would expect would be competing for the Stanley Cup. He said that, there were two offers basically on the table, one from the Caps, and one from the Boston Bruins. And he said that the offer coming from the Boston Bruins was quite a bit better than what the Caps were offering. But he wanted to do right by Kovalchuk. He wanted to kind of pay back some of that. It's a goodwill exchange, if you will. He wanted to kind of pay Kovalchuk back for Kovalchuk having come into Montreal and done such a fantastic job for them on the ice and off the ice. So he asked Kovalchuk which team did he want to go to in order to have the best chance to win a Stanley Cup, whether it be the Caps or the Boston Bruins, and Kovalchuk obviously chose the Capitals. So hopefully he's going to be right. And I think that's just, it's another upside of this trade as well, is that Kovalchuk hasn't won a cup yet. He really wants to win a cup. And I think that with him, being best buddies with Ovechkin, he's close with Kuznetsov and Orlov as well. I think that's going to kind of help, boost this team, because it's kind of easy sometimes when you've already won the Stanley Cup, and recently as well, just back in 2018, it's kind of easy to get a little bit complacent. Maybe you don't have that same hunger, that same drive to do it again right away. But I think with a guy like Kovalchuk coming in, he hasn't won it yet. He really wants to win it. And he has a lot of friends on the team that love him. The rest of the guys, I'm sure, are going to love him as well. And so it's kind of that extra added motivation, like they want to do it for him. It's just kind of one more reason why you want to go out there and win the cup. So I think it'll be good for the Caps in that sense as well. And like I talked about, just adding to our third line, it makes the third line so much better. Kovalchuk, for those who don't know, he's obviously starting on the right wing here on the third line. He can play right wing as well as the left wing as well. And, for a guy like Richard Panik, it bumps him down to the fourth line, which I think is really good. Panik, he didn't start out great here, but he did have an injury as well, which caused him to miss a number of games, double digits in games that he missed. So, I do think that Panik, he's been a lot better recently. He's showing a lot more on the ice, at least for me when I watch him, the old eyeball test. But his numbers are improving as well. But I do think that for Panik, like, he's a left-handed shot. So not only moving him off the third line and down to the fourth, but moving him over to the left side, I think is going to help him a lot as well, because it's on his off wing. It's easier to make plays that way. And for Panik, I think it'll help him as well. And then for the entire Caps lineup, obviously, it just gives you a lot more balance. Your third line now is a lot more dangerous scoring-wise. And then your fourth line as well maybe has a little bit of extra added offense, because Richard Panik's not a fourth-line player. He's got more talent than that. So you have a lot of depth now from top to bottom. Obviously, the top six was already phenomenal, but just filling out that bottom six and really making it that much stronger. And then, of course, knock on wood, if any injuries were to hit either before the playoffs or during the playoffs, you have, potentially a guy like Brendan Leipzig who's sitting out and waiting to come in, who we know can play. He's been great on the fourth line all season long. So I just think, it adds a lot of depth. It balances the lineup a lot more. It makes the lineup a lot more dangerous when you get to that bottom six portion of the lineup. And I think that it's gonna be important for the playoffs as well, because it's pretty much impossible to go through 4 rounds of the playoffs and not lose anybody to injury. And then Brendan Dillon, obviously, that was the first trade that the Caps made prior to leading up to the trade deadline there. Obviously, we've already talked at great length about what he brings to this team. And we saw a lot of it in the game against Pittsburgh on Sunday there. When you look at Brendan Dillon in that game, like, he played over 20 minutes. He was playing on the top pairing again with John Carlson. He's playing against Pittsburgh's top offensive players. And all he did was post a +2 rating in the game, in the win, obviously, 4 penalty minutes as well, and a game high from either side, 9 hits. Many of them of the thunderous variety, and obviously the highlight of the game, the reason why he got some of those penalty minutes there was because of the fight that he had with Evgeny Malkin. Very one-sided bout, obviously. Looking at, Malkin kind of threw a cheap shot, and then Dillon comes in to stick up for his teammate, which I love to see. You love guys who do that. And then Dillon obviously just starts throwing haymakers. The official was kind of trying to get in the way of it. Like, there were actually 2 officials in the way, trying to keep Dillon from fully getting at Malkin. But, he's still, even with those 2 officials in the way, he still managed to land probably about 10 punches directly into Malkin's face and head. So Malkin obviously was kind of perfecting the old turtle there. He was turtling quite hard, trying to cover his face and his head. But what I would say to Evgeny Malkin is, don't start shit if you can't finish it. And you love that from Dillon. He did, Dillon as well. He received the Capitals hard hat after the game in the locker room there as player of the game. So you could tell that all of the players, all of his teammates really appreciated his efforts and his game. And then the fans as well. Like, he got a standing ovation as he was walking off the ice after beating the shit out of Evgeny Malkin. So that's certainly one way to endear yourself to the fans of your new team, is to pick one of the best players on, your biggest rival, and just, wallop him, kick his ass. So love to see that from Brendan Dillon. There were a number of moves being made by other teams around the league, and especially in the Metropolitan Division as well. So let's just take a look at some of those. The Carolina Hurricanes, probably the most active of any team at the trade deadline. Basically, they've had a couple of injuries on defense, one of them very recent. So Brett Pesce, he's out now, and then Dougie Hamilton, of course, we already knew he's been out, and he will be out for a while. So they made a couple of moves on defense, which were obviously necessitated by those injuries. So they traded for Brady Shea from the New York Rangers. They traded their first round pick in this year's draft in 2020 for Brady Shea. And then they traded for Sami Vatanen as well. And then, of course, they traded for Vincent Trocheck from the Florida Panthers. So, for the Hurricanes, I mean, they made these moves, right? But I really don't get how they didn't add a goalie. Because obviously Peter Mrazek and James Reimer, I'm sure everybody saw that because it was all over every TV station because of how that game went down. But Peter Mrazek and James Reimer were both injured in the same game against the Toronto Maple Leafs. They had to use an emergency backup goalie, which if you did not see this game or see how it all went down, I encourage you really to look up the highlights because it was quite something. The emergency backup actually won the game for them. They beat the Leafs with this Zamboni driver in net. So pretty amazing, but it's a great story. But like, you know, you don't have a goalie now, right? So both of your goalies are injured, your starter's injured, your backup's injured. And so even if you're going to have them back before the playoffs, which we don't know that yet, it's been released that they were both out indefinitely. James Reimer with a lower body injury. He's the one who had started the game against the Leafs, and then Mrazek had come in after that against the Leafs, and Mrazek as well out indefinitely with a concussion. So even if you're going to have them back before the playoffs, I still don't get it because first of all, it's not even a guarantee at this point that you're going to make the playoffs. You know, Carolina are really fighting for a playoff spot. There's a number of teams fighting for that playoff spot for those wildcard spots in the Eastern Conference. And now you have to rely on an AHL goalie to get you there. So I just don't get it. I don't get how they didn't trade for a goalie before the deadline because these injuries happened before the deadline. So, you know, there was a guy like Robin Lehner who's a great goalie and he was, you know, he's available and he's being traded for next to nothing as well. So I really don't get how Carolina didn't go out and add a goalie. But hey, you know, to each their own, I guess. But what they did do, like I said, they traded for a couple of defensemen. And then for Vincent Trocheck as well. I should mention, though, before moving on to these guys, that the first game that Carolina played with their, you know, they had to call up both of their AHL goalies. The first game that they played with, you know, one of these AHL goalies in net was against the Dallas Stars. They outshot the Dallas Stars 46-16, and they lost 4-1. Their AHL goalie lets in 4 goals on 16 shots. They lose 4-1. So, you know, hopefully that's how it continues going for them because I don't really like the Hurricanes. But as far as the trades that they did make, get a couple of quality defensemen, obviously gave up quite a bit when you look at what they had to trade away. For Trocheck as well, you know, Trocheck, he's a good player, but I do think that the Carolina Hurricanes they're also going to miss Erik Haula and Lucas Wallmark as well, because those are two guys who have been key depth players for them. I also think that there's always that danger of, you know, you make too many trades and you kind of mess up the team chemistry. So I think that'll be an interesting situation to watch because Carolina really kind of overhauled their roster a little bit. And those two guys that they traded out, Haula and Wallmark, both very popular players around the team with their teammates in the locker room. And, you know, I'm happy to see those guys gone because they both kind of killed us when we've played against the Hurricanes. So they both go back to the Florida Panthers. And then looking at some other teams around the Metropolitan Division. Obviously, we already know that the Pittsburgh Penguins traded for Jason Zucker. They made a couple of other trades as well. They get Patrick Marleau from the San Jose Sharks, which I think is kind of more of a sentimental trade at this point. Marleau, you know, maybe has a little bit left in the tank, but he's not really doing much this season. Didn't really do much with the Toronto Maple Leafs either, so I don't think that one's really going to tip the scales for them either way. He's a great guy, obviously, but on the ice, I think it doesn't really have that much of an effect. And then they traded Dominic Cahoon to the Buffalo Sabres. In return, they get Connor Sheary back. So there was multiple parts involved in that deal, but those are the two biggest ones. So the thing is, the best, they got Evan Rodriguez back as well in that deal. So Sheary and Rodriguez coming back to Pittsburgh, and Dominic Cahoon being shipped over to Buffalo. So the thing about this trade is that the best player in this deal, make no mistake about it, the best player in this deal is Dominic Cahoon, who the Pittsburgh Penguins send over now to the Buffalo Sabres. He's the best player in this deal. The Penguins get two players back, one of them being Connor Sheary. I do think it has the potential to work out for both sides because, the Sabres get the best player in the deal. They get Dominic Cahoon. Cahoon said that he was pretty surprised, honestly, to be traded from Pittsburgh because he was playing so well for them. But the Penguins, they get back Connor Sheary, who obviously, there's a lot of familiarity there between Sheary and the Penguins. He was on the team for a number of years, had a lot of success with them. So I think, Connor Sheary, he hasn't been having the best season. He hasn't been, putting up the type of numbers that I think that he would like to. But then again, he is playing for Buffalo. So, but I think, offensively, he's not as talented as a Dominic Cahoon, but I just think the familiarity was really what Penguins general manager Jim Rutherford was looking for, probably hoping to kind of recapture some of that magic that Sheary had with the Penguins in 2016-2017 when they won the Stanley Cup. For our sake, I hope that doesn't happen. But I do think that the Sabres got the best player in this deal. That's pretty much undisputed. But the Penguins obviously just hoping that Sheary can find some of that magic again with the Penguins. So a little bit of a sentimental trade there as well, but I do think it has the potential to work out just because he already has chemistry with the Penguins with his teammates there, right? So hopefully it doesn't work out, but I think it could. And then when we look at the New York Islanders, the Islanders obviously desperately needed to add some goal scoring, right? They're desperate for scoring up and down the lineup. But just, a huge overpayment of assets to get Pajot from the Senators. So the Islanders, they traded altogether, it was a first-round pick in this year's draft in 2020, a second-round pick in 2020 as well, and then a third-round selection in the 2022 NHL draft. So there's some conditions attached and things like that, but I don't want to bore you with all of that. Essentially, a first-round pick, a second-round pick, and a third-round pick for J.G. Pajot. Now, Pajot, he's a very good player. He's got 24 goals this year, but he's also riding a career high shooting percentage, which is bound to come back down to earth at some point. So I think that could probably hurt for the Islanders if and when that happens, which it will happen. But, Ottawa, the Senators, they really made out on this deal. That's quite the haul, which Pajot did, I should mention as well. He did agree to a 6-year contract extension just shortly after the trade. So that kind of makes it make sense a little bit more. Obviously, the Islanders knew that they were going to be able to re-sign him. So that kind of justifies a little bit, I guess, the price that they paid. But it's a lot to give up for Pajot. And then there was also a Zach Parise trade that we were kind of waiting to hear about that never did come to fruition there. But basically, Zach Parise of the Minnesota Wild, basically himself, as well as Andrew Ladd, which would have been going back from the Islanders as part of the deal to make the money work for the salary cap. Both of those players had apparently waived their no trade clauses in order to make this trade work, but management I guess was not able to make the money work fully before the 3 p.m. deadline. So these are the reports. It's all just reports at this point, but they're from pretty good sources, Elliot Friedman and such. So, the rest of the guys on Sportsnet, but, it's something that they had mentioned as well, that the Islanders will most likely circle back around to during the off season. It's a pretty big trade to pull off, complicated trade money wise, and to try and pull it off just right before that deadline. It's a lot to try to get done. So, they did mention on Sportsnet there that they think the Islanders will circle back around to that over the off season. But as far as for now, Parise staying put. So, that's where the Islanders landed. And then taking a look at, kind of what's going on, in the Atlantic Division as well. Obviously we have, the Tampa Bay Lightning. The Lightning have been obviously on a tear over the last, so many weeks here. Kind of slowing down a little bit now. They've lost a few games in a row now. But they had traded a first round pick as well as Nolan Foote, who's a really good prospect. They traded those two assets to the New Jersey Devils in exchange for Blake Coleman. Coleman, that's a good trade for the Lightning. He's a good player. He should help them. But again, that's a hefty price that they paid for Blake Coleman. And then the Lightning as well, you didn't think that they were going to do it, but they traded their other first round pick that they had in this year's draft as well, because they had two of them. So they traded their second first round pick, and that's their last first round pick in this year's draft. So that's gone now as well. They traded that to the San Jose Sharks in exchange for Barclay Goodrow. And again, Goodrow, he's a good player, but he's going to be on their fourth line. You trade a first round pick for a guy that's going to be on your fourth line. If that, it doesn't make sense to me. Huge overpayment. And then the Boston Bruins, I'm honestly, I'm baffled that the Bruins didn't do anything before the trade deadline, especially as, Tampa Bay, Washington, and Pittsburgh all loaded up around them in the conference. The Bruins, they made a couple of minor deals, for Andre Cachet and Nick Ritchie as well. But these are they're not really impactful players. I think a lot of Bruins fans wanted to see a top six forward, if not two top six forwards coming in at the deadline. We talked about it, in a previous episode that the Bruins need some help in their top six, and their general manager did not give it to them. Didn't really do much of anything. So, and then the Toronto Maple Leafs, for them, their secret plan is obviously to sign David Ayers and ride him all the way to the Stanley Cup. If you missed it, David Ayers is the Zamboni driver who was the emergency backup in Toronto, came in and played for the Carolina Hurricanes and beat the Toronto Maple Leafs in Toronto at Scotiabank Arena on a Saturday night on Hockey Night in Canada, I might add. So again, great story there, but not great if you are a Toronto Maple Leafs fan, as that's an important 2 points for them that they were not able to secure, again, against the Zamboni drivers. So the Leafs not doing anything at the trade deadline. Their fans are not happy about it. It's just a complete meltdown on Twitter right now. If you guys are, having a look on Twitter each day, I'm sure you see a lot of Maple Leafs fans up in arms after the deadline passed, and the general manager for the Leafs, Kyle Dubas, did not do anything. But in Dubas's defense, though, and they were talking about this again on Sportsnet. It's when I was watching Tim and Sid the other day, they're talking about it as well, which is the same thought that I had, which is that if you're Kyle Dubas, why would you make a trade? I'm in full defense of Kyle Dubas here, because why would you do anything to help this team right now? They don't deserve it. Why are you going to go out and spend more assets, more draft picks, more prospects, more whatever, to get players to bring in to help this team that does not deserve it? They're not going to win the cup this year. So why bother, But Leafs fans, it's Toronto, so they're up in arms, obviously. And shifting over to the Western Conference, out of Toronto, the center of the hockey universe, self-anointed, I might add. But we shift over to the Western Conference. There's quite a heated race going on in the Pacific Division, which is kind of, the race to see who can be the least shitty out of a pile of shit. But anyways, the Vancouver Canucks, they made a trade for Tyler Toffoli before the trade deadline, leading up to the deadline. That, of course, necessitated by, Brock Besser. He's going to be out for a while for the rest of the regular season, is the report. So, that's a good trade for them, Toffoli. He's a pretty good player. But the bigger issue in Vancouver right now is the Canucks are going to be in big trouble if Jacob Markstrom, their starting goaltender, does in fact miss the 3 to 4 weeks that they're estimating right now as far as his timeline for a lower body injury. He apparently underwent what General Manager Jim Benning called a minor lower body procedure. If I had to guess, that sounds like a scoping of the knee or something like that. But again, I'm just guessing. But anyways, they've said for now that he's out and that he will be reevaluated in 2 weeks to try to determine some type of a solid timeline. But the estimate initially is 3 to 4 weeks. So if he misses a month, they're in big trouble. He's been their MVP and it's not even close. They're outshot in every single game that they play. So at the deadline, they bring in Louis Domingue. Louis Domingue, Robin Lehner's available, right? He's a much better goalie. He goes for cheap at the deadline, to a division rival, mind you. Like, he went to Las Vegas. So why are the Canucks, again, the Markstrom injury, it happened before the deadline. Why are the Canucks not all over Robin Lehner? I don't get it. Why are you going after Louis Domingue? Louis Domingue, he's got, he started 14 games this season. He has a record of 3-8-2, so 3 wins and 10 losses, and he's got a goals against average of 3.79 and a save percentage of only .882. So why the fuck are you trading for Louis Domingue when Robin Lehner's available if you know that your starting goalie is going to miss time and you're in this tight playoff race? It seems to be that every night that you look at the standings, there's 1 point separates all the teams in the Pacific Division, from first place down to you're missing the playoffs, right? So when it's that tight and you know that your starting goalie is going to be out for any period of time, why the hell are you not trading for Robin Lehner? Again, I don't get it. And again, it's a double whammy because he ends up going to a division rival in Las Vegas. So looking at the other teams in the Pacific, I love what the Edmonton Oilers did. They added a couple of really fast forwards to play with, obviously, speedster Connor McDavid. Andreas Athanasiou out of Detroit, he moves over to the Oilers, and then Tyler Ennis as well. And in their first game with the Oilers, both Athanasiou and Ennis did score. They both had 1 goal and 1 assist each, playing on McDavid's line. So that looks like, it's an instant fit. There's instant chemistry, has the potential to be a home run for Edmonton. And then the other thing that they did was they traded for Mike Green from Detroit as well. Obviously ex-Capital Mike Green, who a lot of us were hoping would come back to the Caps at the deadline. But he heads over to Edmonton, and that'll help them a lot as well, to help with their breakouts, transitioning the puck. Obviously, Greeny makes such a great first pass out of his own zone, so it should help them a lot in that department. And obviously, can help their power play as well if they choose to play him there as well, probably on the second unit because Edmonton's power play really doesn't need a lot of help at this point. It's first in the entire NHL. But yeah, he'll help them in a number of areas. And then Las Vegas as well, staying in the Pacific Division. They got stronger as well. When you look at the trades that they made. The big one for the Golden Knights happened prior to the trade deadline, in the days leading up to it, on February 19th. They traded their second-round pick in this year's draft, 2020, as well as a second-round pick in 2021. So 2 second-round picks for Alec Martinez from the Los Angeles Kings. Obviously, Martinez is a great defenseman. And then on the actual deadline day, of course, I've mentioned it already, but they traded for goaltender Robin Lehner. That gives them a fantastic 1-2 punch between Robin Lehner and obviously Marc-Andre Fleury. And then they did trade for Nick Cousins as well, kind of a guy to fill in on their fourth line. He's a pretty damn good fourth line player. So I really like what Vegas did at the deadline, and then the Calgary Flames as well. Again, staying in the Pacific Division. We're kind of just going over the teams who made trades and did things, the movers and shakers. So we're not going to talk about everyone because a lot of teams did nothing. But the Calgary Flames, they add Gustafson from the Chicago Blackhawks, defenseman who had a 60-point season just last season, again, as a defenseman. But, for the Flames, they added Gustafson and Forbort as well from the LA Kings. So they do add a couple of defensemen. But I think that their fans would have liked to see a top 6 forward being added as well to their group. That didn't that did not materialize or did not happen. I don't know if it was that their general manager just couldn't make it happen, couldn't find something that was going to work or that he liked, or if he didn't really try. But nothing came to fruition as far as forward help for the Flames. So a lot of their fans not too happy about that, not too pleased with that. But The Pacific Division, like I said, it's one of the worst divisions we've seen in a very long time. So I don't think that, you don't really need to add a ton in order to probably be competitive in that division as it is this season. I think that, it's anybody's game right now in the Pacific. Anybody can kind of take it and run with it. Right now it appears that Vegas is doing that. Vegas has won 7 straight games. So, we'll kind of wait to see how it all plays out. But the Pacific Division as a whole, similar to the Metropolitan Division, a lot of teams beefing up, adding different parts, adding to their lineups. So, lots of movers and shakers at this year's trade deadline. There was, I read somewhere there was a record number of trades actually made on deadline day, like not counting the ones that happened in the days leading up to the trade deadline, but on deadline day itself, on February 24th, there was a record number of trades that took place. So that's great to see. It's always exciting for the fans as well. I always say it's one of the best days of the entire calendar year for fans is trade deadline day. So there's always a lot happening. Kind of stay glued to your TV or glued to Twitter all day. Kind of waiting to see what plays out. So it's always good when it doesn't disappoint and when there's a lot of parts moving around back and forth. So that's going to be all that we have for you today, Caps fans. Again, thank you all so much for listening. If you have not already done so, please don't forget to subscribe to our podcast. We're available pretty much anywhere and everywhere that you get your podcast from. We're on Apple Podcasts, we're on Spotify, iHeartRadio, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, TuneIn. We're on Podcast Addict now as well. So again, pretty much anywhere and everywhere that you would get your podcast from, we are there. So do not forget to subscribe. Leave us a review if you like what you hear. I always love to read the reviews from fans. And again, thank you all so much for listening. It was a great trade deadline for the Caps, hoping that it's going to pay off here in the near future. Until next time, Caps fans, stay classy and let's go Caps!